there, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of Cleaning the Built World podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Ma, co-founder at Mero. Today, I have a very special guest with me. We've been in touch with this guest over the past few weeks and months, and he's been extremely knowledgeable and informative in terms of his background and experiences in the janitorial and commercial cleaning industry. With me here today is Jason Lee, Director of Special Services at the Bud Group. Jason, welcome to the podcast. And would you mind giving a quick introduction for yourself?
Yeah, good morning, Nathan. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's great to be here. I met with Victor a couple of times leading up and obviously participated in the podcast. A lot of the information that gets put out on behalf of the industry is very helpful. So very humbled to be here and looking forward to helping out anybody else here in the industry as far as what we're doing here at the Bud Group. A little bit about my background. I've kind of served on both sides of the table, if you will. When I was in construction, well, let me back up. If you started, so I was in the U.S. Army. A lot of folks correlate the U.S. Army to just in battle. I was not in battle. I was director of communications out of Washington, D.C. One of the things that we did back in the 90s was we were faced with the downsizing of the military. And what that means is you still have the same mission, but you got half the people and half the budget to perform that mission. And we're seeing that same thing right now. So that I became a Lean Six Sigma, working through the United States government, working with all branches back in D.C. during that time. So that led me over to my kind of civilian career, if you will. I started out in construction. And one of the things that we did was also we outsourced our maintenance piece. So after we built the building, we'd approach the folks and say, hey, why don't you let us maintain it? And that's really where I got exposed to the building services contracting industry, everything from maintenance, janitorial, landscaping, everything else included. And one of the first things I noticed was being on that side of the table was, how do you differentiate the cleaning companies as an example, especially because a lot of the proposals were coming over were very, I'd hate to call it boilerplate, but very similar. So with that said, I was given the opportunity to come over to the operations and maintenance side. I'm a lead AP, so I've served on a lot of lead certified projects across the United States for the last 15 years. And in that capacity, I worked for some building service contractors, the construction company as well, and in addition to a disaster recovery company. So it brings me to Bud Group, doing some fantastic things here with the Specialty Services Division. I don't know if you're familiar with the Bud Group. We are a family owned. This month is our 60th anniversary as a company. And anyhow, we're here in the Southeast and we're right here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Yeah, amazing. And I absolutely want to come back to your experiences. You know, you haven't been in the military and being a veteran, but I kind of want to touch on and share a little bit more about the Bud Group. So as you mentioned, you kind of hopped around at other similar industries in the building services industry, focusing in on a couple, including Harvard Maintenance and GCA Services. Can you speak to how Bud Group differs from those companies in any way and what sets the Bud Group apart? Specifically, how does the Bud Group look at itself as a leader in technology, maybe business processes, training, culture, those sorts of things? How does the Bud Group stand out?
Absolutely. So one of the first things is, if you're familiar with GCA back in the private equity owned, a little bit different mission each and every day. It was, and that's why one of the reasons why I went over to a privately owned company, Harvard, fantastic company owned by the Dubins. They have a very similar footprint, the larger footprint than the Bud Group. They're based out of Miami, headquartered, but also family owned. And the reason why I came over to the Bud Group, again, Bud Group and Harvard is very similar, family owned, a lot of deep roots there. Similar mission, kind of do as you do, a lot of integrity, morals and involved there, fantastic work cultures. But I'm located about 10 minutes from the headquarters here at the Bud Group. So for me, it just made a lot of sense as my son got a little bit older. Of course, my wife was always busy as I was traveling in the past and now she was sitting at home and I needed to be home with the family. So it's great to be closer to home. And that was one of the reasons that brought me to the Bud Group.
Yeah, awesome. And one thing that kind of catches my attention there is, family owned. I actually come from a family owned business background myself. My grandfather started a business in Western Canada about 50 years ago. And it kind of continues to this day. So maybe talk to me a little bit about how family owned businesses in the janitorial industry, how they kind of differ from, say the big guys, because I think this is a trend. We see it a lot in Canada as well. There's some major family owned and multi-generational cleaning companies that, kind of go toe to toe with some of the larger organizations and maybe even publicly traded companies. So talk to me how you think family owned commercial cleaning operations set themselves apart.
Absolutely. So it starts with core values, right? I mean, on my shirt, it says the Bud Group. That is a gentleman's last name. So
Hmm.
just let that sink in. When you talk about family owned, it's not a corporation. It's not a private equity group. It's not, something that's traded on the stock exchange. That's a family's last name. So when you walk into a customer, you represent that family, especially with
Hmm.
something that's so deeply ingrained here in the Carolinas. So you have a core responsibility as far as not only as a person, but to develop your team under those same core values. So I always
Right.
say, the best way to simplify that is we're really not just running a business. It's really an extension of your family. And you make business decisions at home each and every day. And it's the same thing that applies, at work at the same time. So in a family owned company, those core values is what aligns with your home values.
Yeah, that's great. And I think family owned businesses, they attract, I tend to, you're saying they attract a certain individual that, they take pride and really, I think, put, like you said, their full energy and attention to things as if it was their own family, if it was their own business. And I think that's the most telling part about the people that make up these companies. Cause, at the end of the day, janitorial is a people business, and, we'll definitely get into that. But I did want to kind of revisit again, one of the opening comments, opening statements. I don't want to go too far without straying away from this, but you mentioned the fact that you are a veteran and having served your country in the past. How did the military and serving your country prepare you for a career in the building services industry? And how do you feel like it's given you a unique perspective? You alluded to the fact that we're in a changing labor market and changing dynamics of maybe a shrinking pool of a workforce. How did that experience uniquely shape your current career in the building service contractor industry?
Yeah. Thank you, Nathan. So in the military, your number one goal is to take care of the people around you. So people is number one. We talk about triple bottom line. People comes first. People, you of course have to make money, economic. And of course the environment has to be a safe working environment with no negative impact. But at the end of the day, the service industry, about people first. People are our greatest assets. So we've got a tagline that we call here in specialty services. Service is our product, because that's something we can quantify. It's tangible. And
Hmm.
then management is our strength. So a lot of things that we do for customers, it is outsourced work, and we're taking that responsibility off of their plate and taking care of it for, as a member of the Bud Group. So
Right.
that's one of the great things about the military. It's very service oriented.
Hmm.
Your product is a service and your people is your greatest strength.
Right. Yeah. No, I definitely love that. And maybe speaking to that sort of values orientation, that values based sort of view towards, your business and your operations. What are some of the values that the Bud Group has that you feel like, sets it apart from some of the other organizations out there?
I'm going to quote our founding Richard Budd. It's actually on our training room. It's on a lot of our material internal that we do for training. And it's quite simply do what you always say you're going to do. And that's what it comes down to. At the end of the day, we could talk about scopes of work and service level agreements and all these other things. But really at the end of the day, you got to build trust. We talk about relationships. It's about that trust, and they got to put confidence when they outsource something. They're putting confidence in that service provider. So you got to have somebody who's going to do what they're going to say they're going to do.
Yeah, I love that for multiple different reasons. Obviously, I think with the changing times and changing demographics in our workplaces, I think at times, we can feel like some of these, very simple but powerful messages, they can kind of go over the wayside. There's new training and new employees and yeah, new workforce coming in. So those simple, everybody can understand exactly, what that means. And, I think that's a powerful message as well, because obviously, we're moving into a future with more technology, more tools at our kind of disposal and the ability to kind of implement whole different ways of really just, like you said, do what you say you're going to do. It sounds simple, but it's becoming more challenging than it ever has. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the Bud Group and some projects and goals that you have and put into place to implement some of those values. So like you said, do what you say you're going to do. What are some specific projects, programs that you have in place that, can really influence or impact that value being kind of distributed across your whole organization?
Absolutely. So how do you integrate that? First and foremost, you have to lead by example. Of course, that's where it starts. As far as programs, projects, I wouldn't call it a project because this is something that's already been ingrained with the company. I think the important thing is we're really not doing anything different. And I know we're evolving. The industry is transforming. The customers have different needs post pandemic, if you will. But at the end of the day, if that's already kind of a change management culture that's built within your workforce, you don't really need to have a project. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
We talk about it. We have a Monday and Wednesday call each and every week. It's a workshop based to where we field questions, concerns. We talk about challenges, a lot of shared information within the team to where we can learn from each other. And that goes about both ways, lessons learned as well as successes. So there's a lot of great collaboration that goes on internally within the company to make sure we're identifying those trends. We talk a lot about leading indicators. So again, when we talk about, the best way to answer your question, Nathan, is it's not really a project or an initiative. It's more about the ingrained behavior or the good habits that we already have to identify leading indicators and, as they call it, make those informed decisions to stay in front of the industry.
Yeah, that's really just, I think, a testament to the strong management culture and, ability to, identify and see, the biggest contributors and what's making the most impact. And I want to ask a little bit about kind of your client facing work. So, we touched on it briefly, but obviously we're in a changing industry right now. The pandemic has created different ways, especially in commercial and office in terms of how these spaces are cleaned. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you address, some of the biggest concerns for your clients right now. For example, low occupancy rates in office, or maybe even it's, these dynamic occupancy rates, no one day is the same. How are you finding some of these personalized solutions for your clients and trying to give them the best possible outcome in the field?
Absolutely. So this is where specialty services was born. Specialty services, we've always called it T&M in the past, time and material, but we formalized that a couple of years ago. That was in response to the pandemic. So specialty services addresses a lot of those concerns that's going through the industry right now to answer our needs around the customers. So what is that? So in response to customer need, as you know, when the pandemic first hit, a lot of the buildings were shut down. And what leadership did is they took a look. We had employees that did not want to go, on unemployment, wanted to stay work. So we cross-trained them. They became GBAC certified technicians. We invested in them, cross-trained them, and they became essential workforce. We put them as part of mobile disinfection technicians. We branded the vans and became really a route-based cleaning team doing disinfection, servicing the communities that they live in so they could stay working, obviously. What that meant was as disinfection started going away and those buildings started to open up, that workforce went back into their buildings. But what we found out, to your point, they were all occupied. So as an example, we'd like to have, we self-perform majority of our work, if not all. And if we have a lot of the workforce is full-time, that's one of the business models that we have here. And as you can imagine, if somebody was no longer had a 40-hour work week at their current building, because it was due to lack of staffing or density or all the occupants haven't come back yet, we would find really two employees within that same area. Two employers within that same area. And then we could keep that worker working full time as an example. So what that was, again, that could be specialty services as well. So let me jump into that. That is a varying around time and material. So what does that mean? So there's a lot of projects that are either part of a janitorial scope or maybe in addition to, call it ad hoc on a project basis. So that's something we can perform for the customer and specialty services as far as route based. And that can go back to cleaning as well. So in other words, if you no longer have a need for a 5-day-a-week, 40-hour-a-week employee, but you're still looking for that caliber of a person who's full-time, we can put them in a route based to where they could be servicing several customers in the same week. So you can still maintain that level of expertise. Now, the other piece that we've done is called day cleaning. Day cleaning has been around really since 2001. It's been around forever. First of all, it's over in Europe. It's almost the norm. Here in the United States, since 2001, due to security reasons, a lot of the government buildings required day cleaning. And it's really for a safety and security reason. When they shut down the building, they don't want anybody running around the building. And one of the things that I realized as we had government customers back then, they were transitioning to day cleaning, was a lot of benefits that it had around occupant health. Because I'll give you an example around day cleaning. So imagine you go to a hospital and you're at the hospital and the environmental services team does not come around to clean until at night. We all know that doesn't happen. So why would we accept that in an office building? There's still germs, there's pathogens, illness, right? Maybe not hospital level. So at the end of the day, it's really a preventative. Instead of cross transmission taking place throughout the entire day, we take a staff and put them do it during the daytime with day porters.
Right.
instead of the night cleaning model. It's more of a concierge level of cleaning. We're not only, so yeah, I could go into more examples there, but a lot of folks associate day cleaning a little bit different. And sometimes we get some pushback, oh, we don't want anybody interrupting us during their workplace. But especially around the emphasis around cleaning for health, when we have the opportunity to meet with the stakeholders, with the customers, and we explain the cleaning for health impact of having a day cleaning program, it's almost a no-brainer.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, it's something that I find personally very interesting because, it seems like to me, your ability to adapt to, what happened quite suddenly in terms of the pandemic was a huge, call it differentiator for the Bud Group. Sounds like, you were very hands-on and very consultative actually to the needs of the client. I'd love to hear a little bit more on the specifics. So you talked about their route based, you talked about reallocating some of that labor in terms of cleaners and ensuring that they had continue to have a full-time schedule, maybe into some other clients nearby and whatnot. What types of data or information are you using in order to drive some of those decisions? Because I think obviously we're given a plethora of different solutions out there on the market. I'd love to hear about, kind of what piece of data you used. Maybe it was, bringing in some client data. Maybe it was information that was ready available. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So it goes back to the customer need, and that could be based on a few things. Occupancy was a huge driver, as you mentioned. So we did a lot of occupancy type data to evaluate when the occupants were in the office or scheduled to be in the office. And we built around the janitorial scope of work based on those days. So as you know, in the scope of work, it's task and frequency based on the daytime and staffing model, whether it's daytime or nighttime to be there. And our number one goal around cleaning for health and hygiene, even before the pandemic, but even more so now, is to make sure that we align our staff with the occupancy of the building. So we were looking at the data. The customers did bring in some other outside resources to identify the occupancy, density, things like that within certain spaces. And then we also built out the program because at the end of the day, let's back up because Nathan, I think you bring up a great point. Just 5 years ago, you would come into a building and say, okay, it's 100,000 square feet. We can just put them on a route and let them go and make sure there's a critical flow. And here's your rate per square foot based on these tasks. Then we'll perform as I pass through this, right? Team-based cleaning, whatever it may be. Nowadays, it's a little different. You literally could clean one suite, the first hour, and then clean the next suite at the end of the day, just because based on availability or the occupancy. So it's very customized. As you mentioned, consultative, that's the exact word that we say. So we take a consultative approach to build out that scope of work. We have 3 different scenarios based on budget, as you can imagine. And of course, each scenario or phase, tiers is really what they're called, of scope of work based on their budget. And then of course, number of tasks and frequencies that we perform. It's an economy. It's what we call the median, the middle of the road, if you will. And then we do have a premium. And as you can imagine, in some cases, we're performing varying levels of those tiers of cleaning in the same facility, just depending on the space.
Right.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a little bit about occupancy and the property bringing in some solutions and the cleaning company adopting it. Have you been kind of on the flip side of that? Has the Bud Group used any different ways of saying, hey, client property, we have this solution for occupancy. We use this at XYZ sites and it's effective. Have you guys been kind of proactive or I guess, forward looking in that regard? Or do you look at that as more of the property's responsibility to have in place and you guys are willing to adapt and use different types of solutions and technologies across a lot of your different sites?
Yeah. So we've taken on it as part of our responsibility, approached customers about it. All of our customers up to this point, 100% of them have chosen to pursue that and then provide the data to us to build out the scope of work.
Right. Okay. And you're mentioning, and we're talking a lot about scope of work. And one thing that we're seeing as a trend in the industry is now that these scopes of work, say, are, changing on the fly or, kind of maybe being modified based on usage. What we see is, cleaning validation is validating the cleaners have been in the specific spaces and what they've done. I'd love to hear about how you kind of display or show some of those, validation pieces to your clients. Obviously now I think there's an understanding on the client side that, hey, if the second floor hasn't been used, we don't need to necessarily clean there. But what types of tools or resources are you leveraging for your specific customer needs in order to show, the Bud Group has a very high level quality of service, and you can see this in a very simple or easy to view manner. What types of solutions are you using for that?
We do. So this is where technology comes in. So everything that we do, we measure. To your point, we have created a proprietary team task application. It's on our tablet. It's in the hands of all of our field employees at every building. What that means is that customized scope of work is built into this system. And we go through each and every day, you can see in real time status where we're at completing those daily tasks and frequencies. At the end of the day, you get a report as far as where we finished, as far as the completion. And then you can see a trend throughout that. Now, the nice thing is also based on our quality assurance piece, we can overlay the quality assurance in addition to the tasks and frequencies, and then really be proactive to identify issues really before they become maybe a complaint from your occupants.
Right.
Those are ways we use as a leading indicator on this side. The other piece is a lot of people talk about sustainability. We're a CIMS, Cleaning Industry Management Standards certified organization. And everyone talks about sustainability. It's kind of the norm, but I've yet to find another company that measures it. So what that means is we've created a sustainability assurance scorecard based on the CIMS platform, which if you're familiar, it follows ISO 14001. So those are some of the things that we also follow and track as a scorecard for our customers, also on the sustainability side, as well as the tasks and frequencies on a daily basis.
Right. Yeah. No, that is outstanding. And I think as far as, operational items go and whatnot, all of this is really kind of coming together. I'd love to hear, I guess, future looking now, maybe put on your future looking glasses and lens. Maybe there's a future where, occupancy increases or we see, things return back to normal. How do you feel like the Bud Group will evolve in, whatever the future is to hold? What types of practices have you already put in place to adapt for, something that could happen on the turn of a dime, really? One big company issues back a return to work statement and, tens or dozens of companies follow. How is the Bud Group prepared for a future that may look like that?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked that, Nathan. So part of the specialty services, again, in my career, I've overseen indoor environmental quality through LEED and well buildings. One of the things that we identify and we track also is air quality. So we've identified milestones, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this. If you look at the trends of occupancy, you can also look at VOCs because these will increase, of course, based on occupancy within that space. So we can look at data based on our air quality sensors that we have at the buildings as well to identify milestones and then increase the scope of work or make those recommendations based on that data to the customer.
Got it. Yeah, that's incredible. I think just utilizing different sources of data and making your best judgment. I think that is the future of this industry and many others. And I think at Mero we're trying to help push that forward as much as possible. We've talked a lot, I think, about labor and different, kind of labor focused practices and occupancy and whatnot. I'd love to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about supply chain. And obviously this is another part about the janitorial industry that, it's not the sexiest part of the industry, but, toilet paper and paper towel, they're not going anywhere. From our previous discussions, we know that the Bud Group has implemented some creative ways to ensure just-in-time delivery of supplies and controlling some of the costs, if you're to supply some of these inventory to your customers. Can you expand a little bit on some of these tactics, if you will, and tell us a little bit about how you feel like it helps you adjust and adapt for the current working environments?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, a huge shout out to our suppliers and manufacturers. We could not do what we do on each and every day basis without their assistance and their support. So it's very critical. So we have products, tools, equipment, processes that all play a critical role in our service delivery at the end of it every day. We are partners with the NSA, National Service Alliance. That's our group purchasing organizations. So we partner with all of those folks on the product side. And what we've done is, because it's the customers are coming back, we're not only looking for innovation, latest in technology, improved methods around those sustainability, cost, least impact upon not only for us, because let me back up because let's talk about that. As we're looking into this isn't customer driven, working for a family owned company. We want to
Mhm.
protect our employees who are exposed or using these products, tools, or equipment on a day to day basis. We want to make sure the most ergonomic, safe, yet effective methods for our employees. And then, of course, we can tell that story to the customer, how it also will not have a negative impact on their occupants. And obviously something we can measure as a benefit to their occupants, as I mentioned. On the supplier side, what we have done, we have cost controls in place because we're a larger organization. We can purchase based on volume. One of the things that we've put in place here recently, as an example, if we've identified, as an example, let's call it 2 key accounts that are using different manufacturers, we can go back to those 2 key accounts, mention to them, of course, as long as there's not some type of a prescribed manufacturer in place, make a recommendation, because what'll happen is we can bundle that under a single provider or manufacturer or supplier. We can renegotiate some, volume discounts. And of course, we
Mhm.
pass that on to the customer. So those are some of the things we're doing proactively, working with our vendors to increase growth. Because again, if there's a fantastic product, we want to have it in every one of our facilities. And then of course we can pass those cost savings on to the customer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good way to kind of start to wrap up. I do have one more question, and this is something that I think is a big topic for the industry at large is around sustainability. How does the Bud Group integrate eco-friendly practices and products into your cleaning services? And have you faced any challenges implementing some of these different practices? I know, the sustainability world can move pretty quickly, different regulations and requirements. You mentioned LEED, you mentioned SIMS, and I know those are kind of regulatory and approvals for different areas of business, but talk to me a little bit about sustainability and how the Bud Group implements sustainability as part of their practices.
Absolutely. So have we faced any pushback? Absolutely not. This is a goal of the company to be leaders within the industry. We want to make sure those safe practices are for our employees. So when we talk about sustainability, it falls under ESG, environmental, social governance. Again, we put people first. People are our greatest assets. So we want to make sure we have a great workplace culture for our employees. We have a council around EcoVadis. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It's an annual reporting structure for companies. One of the things that we report, everything from D&I development, anyhow, employee development as well on that social side. And then of course, I think where you're going down the line of sustainability is that cost piece. So
Yeah.
we're going to find some cost controls that we pass on to the customer. And then from the environmental perspective, there's also cost savings around environmental conservation. So a lot of the things that we're doing, talk about something as simple as a zero waste product, something that is diverted from the landfill. There's actually a cost savings to the customer that's passed along to them based on
Right.
our purchasing or supply chain. So if you're familiar with it, scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3 emissions, we can directly benefit them based on all of those practices that we talked about around sustainability. Not all the customers are asking for that data. Hopefully someday we do
Yep.
promote it. As you can imagine in our proposals, it's a full capability. As I mentioned, everything that we do, we can measure, whether it be economic, social, or environmental. There's a cost savings. It's just a matter of going in, baselining what they're currently doing, identify, areas for improvement and putting that action into place.
Right. Yeah, no, to me, it sounds like the Bud Group has an extremely well defined and really well researched strategy in terms of, adapting for, the changing world and, your background that you went over from being a veteran and, so many other things I'm sure have lent a huge impact towards, allowing the Bud Group to, adopt different solutions, technologies to be client facing and, adapt for the future. I'd love to always turn the tables a little bit. I've been asking you a lot of questions and, kind of just to flip some things the other way, we invite you to ask a question about how Mero is looking at the changes in commercial cleaning and property management and how BSCs and property managers can create win-win partnerships. Are there any questions that you had for us at Mero? Obviously, as kind of being on the technology side of this industry and providing a solution on both the property and the BSC side. Yeah. Any questions come to mind for you that you'd love to ask us?
I certainly do. Yeah. Thank you, Nathan. The labor struggle is real. We're very fortunate. We have a very well-known, well-respected family-owned company here in the Carolinas, the Bud Group. So our retention is some of the best in the industry. However, as we assume new business or new companies with the incumbent staff, we are finding some labor challenges, and I'm sure everyone else is. So I'm just curious what other companies are doing around the labor struggle, finding great employees. It's not always about pay. Obviously we want to pay them well based on their expertise, but of course, a great company culture with all of the fantastic things that will provide for them a safe work environment, the products, tools, equipment to do the job in a satisfactory way. I'm just curious what other folks are doing in addition to some of those.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, and obviously prescient with the changing kind of environment and whatnot. I think the one big thing that we're seeing is janitorial providers starting to add different forms of value add services onto their existing clients and packages. For example, additional services such as hygiene, feminine hygiene waste, and getting the proper certifications for that. I think you mentioned kind of or alluded to that, hey, that we have cleaners in the space already. Why not have them do additional services that are still required of the building instead of, looking for another vendor? We've seen a lot of our providers take on additional responsibility in the building, and maybe this leads to kind of additional revenue or additional, different revenue streams for them. So that's one major way that we've seen companies adapt in terms of, labor, acquiring labor. I think a big component of this is looking at your workforce, as the Bud Group does, as, rapidly dynamic, changing, and, wanting to, make a big impact. So this means giving your, frontline staff more responsibility, maybe, using a technology to reduce some of the overhead work or kind of a lot of the kind of routine based work, reducing those dispenser checks and maybe allowing those cleaners to focus on areas of priority. I think that gives, our frontline staff and cleaning staff the ability to, focus on the things that matter and, who in their work wouldn't want to work on some of the most important things as it relates to their job. And then lastly, I think, as you discussed, taking a consultative approach to each client and applying a different solution. I think we're out of the days of a cookie cutter RFP, as you said, just applying a square footage times by a price in order to kind of create sort of this race to the bottom. I think we're in a unique opportunity for janitorial where, providers have more opportunity now to feature different solutions, to provide more value added services and truly differentiate from one another. The days, we've been working on Mero, actually far before the pandemic. And, this was a vision that we saw. And obviously the pandemic has created sort of a tailwind for us in this sort of, adapting future, but giving janitorial providers the ability to truly stand out on things other than price and, implement Mero from, different stages in the process as well. That could be their existing sites, that can be new RFPs, new proposals, it could be renewals. Those are different examples that we've seen from our providers. And I think it's creating really exciting times for the future. I think if we were in the exact same, rinse and repeat, we'd get a little bit bored. So I think look at this as a big opportunity for the industry to take a step forward, use different ways of applying technology, different business practices and otherwise, and, adapt for the changing future of business. So yeah, just to wrap up, Jason, you've been really, very generous with your time. And we like to ask this as a concluding question. We call it our hot take section. What's one thing in the industry that you disagree with most or that is taken for granted for in the industry?
I think it's the outcome. We touched on our purpose. Our purpose is to provide a healthy environment for the occupants. At the end of the day, doctors treat illness where custodians prevent illness. And I think that's taken for granted. People forget about that when they talk about tasks and frequencies. And that's one of the first conversations we have with customers when they talk about contractions or reductions is what is the impact it's going to have on your occupant's health? And I don't think they always think of it that way. So if we're going to take away tasks, cleaning, whatever it may be, there is going to be an impact. So I think it's taken for granted. Now, of course, that conversation is always open. And we always have the opportunity to discuss that with our customers and make sure we align, make sure we're providing that product that they need. Because at the end of the day, we're here to provide a fantastic workforce or workplace for our employees as well as theirs. We want to make sure it's safe.
I think that's a great way to wrap up. Jason, yeah, you've been extremely, generous with your time. It's been great to learn from, an industry professional, but also someone with an incredible background from, serving as in the military and, coming from other different industries. Jason, were there any last comments you wanted to make before we close off and wrap up here?
No comments. Just thank you for the opportunity to jump on. You guys are doing a great job at the podcast. A lot of helpful information. And yet, we're all in this together. We're building service contractors. It's a small industry at the end of the day, but we serve a huge purpose. And like you mentioned here in the post-pandemic times, we truly do. We call ourselves the custodians of public health. So thank you for helping promote the industry. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. Yep. Jason, thank you very much for your time and look forward to chatting again soon.
Same here. Thanks, everything.